The War Museum of the Boer Republics in Bloemfontein, South Africa, is aimed at reminding all visitors of the shared suffering experienced by both white and black South Africans in the Anglo-Boer War, also known as the South African War. One of the features on the grounds of the museum is a memorial and sculpture based on an eyewitness account of a dying child during the war. In addition, the museum also erected a garden of remembrance.
The sandstone walls and granite panels of this garden of remembrance reflect the names of approximately 35,000 documented white and black women, several elderly men, but mainly children who died in the various concentration camps or on a route in the veldt. The memorial only reflects those names which could still be traced in the existing records found in the repositories of the National Archives of South Africa. The Garden of Remembrance brings the visitor into contact with the names of the deceased, which humanizes and personalizes the death statistics in the concentration camps in a certain sense.
A children's labyrinth was also added in recent years.
Given the high mortality rate amongst children in the white and black camps during the Anglo-Boer War or the South African War, the museum in 2020 decided to construct and develop a memorial that specifically commemorates these children. The memorial takes on the form of a 137-meter-long labyrinth with 7 lanes leading up to an indigenous wild olive tree symbolizing life. Utterances by children in the camps can be seen on the surrounding wall. The aim was to convey a universal message that goes beyond cultural barriers and denounces the suffering of children in conflicts.
Furthermore, the museum houses an extensive collection of artifacts that are related or belonged to children in the war.
The fate of women, and especially children, during the war remains one of the most devastating chapters in the history of our country. The experience of especially children during this war has universal and contemporary meaning up till this day. By commemorating the mutual suffering of both black and white women and children, we want to promote nation building, social cohesion, and nation healing.
The War Museum remains committed to keeping the memory of all South African women and children who suffered and died in the war alive. We believe that a better understanding of our past will better equip our people to embrace the challenges of our future. Through the years, the Anglo-Boer War, or the South African War of 1899 to 1902, has been described as the last gentleman's war, a white man's war, a mere footnote in British imperial history. But after the smoke cleared from the battlefields, from the burnt-out farms and kraals, and all the soldiers had gone home, reality reveals a different story of suffering and death amongst the local population. Almost 7,000 members of the mostly civilian Boer forces were killed during the conflict. About 11,000 white and black adult civilians died in concentration or internment camps. Approximately 40,000 white and black children under the age of 16 years also perished in these camps. Emily Hobhouse, a British humanitarian who experienced the suffering of this war firsthand, recalled,
"It's hard to stand and look on at such misery and be able to do almost nothing. I can't describe what it is to see these children lying about in a state of collapse, like withered flowers being thrown away.
By the middle of the 19th century, two independent Boer republics had been established in the interior of what is known today as South Africa. These were the Transvaal, also known as the South African Republic, with Pretoria as capital city, and the Orange Free State Republic, with Bloemfontein as its capital. The Boers, meaning farmers, were the descendants of Dutch and, to a lesser extent, also French and German settlers who migrated from the Cape Colony to escape British rule. They were later also known as Afrikaners. It is estimated that about 148,000 Boers lived amongst a black population of 755,000 in the Transvaal, while around 71,000 Boers and 130,000 blacks resided in the Free State. Like elsewhere during the colonial and imperialist era of the 1800s, indigenous people were excluded from participation in the affairs of state and governance in the two republics. Mainly due to a clash between the ideologies of Afrikaner nationalism and British imperialism, war broke out between Britain and the two Boer republics in October 1899. Britain and its colonies mustered a well-equipped armed force that numbered more than 450,000 men by the end of the war. To the contrary, the Free State and Transvaal called up about 55,000 civilian men between the ages of 16 and 60, who were organized into commandos. A commando was a geographical fighting unit consisting of conscripts from a particular town or district. Many miners of 16 years and older accompanied their fathers on commando during the conventional phase of the war. Later in the war, numerous boys younger than 16 years also joined the commandos. Since many of these boys were acquainted with rifles due to a pioneering lifestyle on farms in rural areas, the threat that they posed to the enemy should not be underestimated. Life on commando was not easy for such boys. There was little time to sleep, and when they did, it was on the bare ground with little shelter. Often, water to wash and food were scarce. Boer General Christian de Wet observed,
"It is terrible that children should be exposed to such dangers, but if we had not taken them with us, they would have all been captured, torn from their mother's arms and carried away to an overseas prisoner of war camp, not knowing if they'll ever see their loved ones again." It was not without good cause that the children joined the commandos. Unfortunately, some of these little ones became prey to the bullets of the enemy. The South African soil is stained with the blood of slain children.
During December 1899, the British Army suffered devastating defeats at the hands of the Boer forces. However, with the arrival of reinforcements from overseas and Lord Frederick Roberts as new Commander-in-Chief of the British forces, the tide would soon turn against the republics. From February to July 1900, several Boer commandos were trapped by the British Army in the Free State, resulting in the surrender of more than 8,000 members of the Boer forces. However, Boer commanders then changed their tactics to geographically expand the conflict by means of guerrilla warfare. Larger Boer commandos disbanded into smaller and more mobile mounted units, performing surprise attacks on British convoys and facilities, seizing supplies and sabotaging railway tracks and telegraph lines.
The British Army, like all European armies, was a conventionally trained army. They were trained to fight a conventional war. And now all of a sudden they were confronted by a foe that did not play the game of war according to your traditional war principles. They hit and they ran. So the British Army in South Africa found themselves in a very, very difficult position. And in a desperate attempt to defeat the mobile Boers, the British then had to improvise a counter-guerrilla strategy.
Lord Roberts became increasingly frustrated by the success of the guerrilla tactics of the Boer forces. The Boers in the veldt had the support of their families, who were still living on farms throughout the Transvaal and Free State republics. These family members provided them with food, medical care, information on troop movements, etc. As a result, Roberts gave orders that so-called scorched earth tactics be implemented. The target: Boer families and their farms. What followed could be described as the most ruthless and brutal period of the war. Scorched earth tactics implemented by the British Army led to the destruction of 30,000 farms. That is, about 80% of all the farms in the Free State and Transvaal republics. In the process, farmsteads were burnt down, while crops, farm equipment, household possessions and livestock were destroyed. 40 towns were partially or fully demolished. Boer women and children were forcefully removed from their farms. Some British officers were appalled by the implementation of these tactics and felt that such behavior towards women and children degraded the soldiers morally. But orders were orders.
From a military perspective, the Boer farms were part and parcel of the Boer military infrastructure and therefore had to be destroyed. So from a purely military perspective, the British had no alternative but to destroy the Boer farms, the farmhouses. What followed was a humanitarian disaster. And I'm not in any way taking away the horror of that humanitarian disaster for white and black.
In total, about 145,000 Boer women, children and elderly were eventually removed from the farms in the two republics. Being allowed to take some furniture and household goods along, they were transported to almost 50 concentration or internment camps. About 34,000 of them would eventually die, either en route or in these camps. Around 80% of these fatalities were children of 16 years and younger. The setup of these camps for the Boer civilian population remains a contentious issue until this day.
There is a huge difference between the concentration camps of the Anglo-Boer War and the concentration camps of the Second World War. There was no deliberate attempt from the British authorities during the Anglo-Boer War to kill, to murder either Afrikaans-speaking white inhabitants of the camps or the black inhabitants of the camps. And therefore I prefer the term internment camp.
The British Army created a logistical nightmare for the camp administrators, who desperately tried to accommodate the endless inflow of Boer women and children. Some camps, with infrastructure to accommodate 500 people, within a few months hold 3,000. This overcrowding, as well as insufficient food supplies resulting in a meager diet, a lack of clean potable water, inadequate sanitation, ill-equipped or overrun medical facilities, and extreme weather conditions, caused disease in many camps. As a result, more than 27,000 white women, children, and the elderly died in camps. Undisputedly, one of the most tragic consequences of the war. To avoid being captured and sent to camps, hundreds of Boer women and their children left their farms to hide in the veld. Wagons were loaded with food, little furniture and clothing. Some also took livestock and trusted farm workers along. Many of these women-led groups had to relocate continuously to avoid capture. In the process, the women and children endured extreme hardship. Conditions in the camps only improved after Hobhouse, a British civilian, visited South Africa and brought the appalling situation to the attention of Parliament in London and the media. Thereafter, the British government was pressurised to improve the situation in the camps, with a resultant decline in the ensuing death rate. In the camps, Boer teenagers and younger siblings assisted their mothers with household tasks such as cleaning, cooking, fetching water and rations, washing and chopping wood. Children from affluent families experienced more bearable living conditions because their mothers were able to buy goods in nearby towns. Temporary schools, officially endorsed by camp authorities and where classes were presented by English-speaking teachers, were established in many camps. Ministers of religion were also permitted to give spiritual counseling to those in need. Children could attend open-air church services, often dressed in their Sunday best. To many children, the idea of playing was overshadowed by fear, induced by their experiences and circumstances. However, to some, playing with toys was a means to escape from the world around them. Sporting events were also presented in some camps to keep the children occupied. Despite participation in such activities, some ministers of religion noted that despondency and heaviness of spirit were rampant amongst the camp children, due to the psychological impact of seeing family and friends dying before their eyes. During the implementation of scorched earth tactics, the houses and livestock of small-scale black subsistence farmers in the Free State were likewise destroyed, and the families relocated to camps, which were described as refugee or labour camps at the time. A young black boy, Cas Main, remembered.
My father was away fighting for the Boers. In the war, when the English came, the soldiers burned our house and crops and shot my father's cattle so that the Boers wouldn't find any food. A serious famine broke out. We ate barley, which was used to feed horses. Eventually, the soldiers took us away in wagons and dropped us off at the camp in Vryburg. War is cruel.
Eventually, a total of about 140,000 black civilians, more than 50% being children, lived in nearly 70 camps.
If the conditions in the white camps were not good, they were in general much worse in the camps for black people. In his doctoral thesis on the black concentration camps of the Anglo-Boer War, as he referred to them, the late Stowell Kessler used the term, if I remember correctly, criminal neglect. The black people were simply neglected in many instances by the British authorities.
Missionaries who visited these black camps reported on great poverty and misery being experienced. Low-grade housing, not affording protection against wind and weather, insanitary conditions, scarce or polluted water, a shortage of firewood and inadequate rations, causing malnutrition and slow starvation. As a result, the same epidemics experienced in white camps also swept through the black camps. It is estimated that about 24,000 black civilians perished in these camps between 1901 and 1903. As in the case of white camps, about 80% of these fatalities were children. In some instances, female black domestic workers and their children accompanied their employers to the white camps. Here, they continued to assist with household tasks and were either paid or received food in exchange for their work. They lived in designated sections reserved for black servants in the white camps or in nearby black camps. In some camps, black children received basic schooling and instruction in religion from missionaries. During the hostilities, about 23,000 Boer prisoners of war were shipped off to overseas camps in India, St. Helena, Bermuda and Ceylon, which is today known as Sri Lanka. This included almost 1,400 boys between the ages of 6 and 15 years, who were either captured while on commando or removed from farms to prevent them from joining the Boer forces, especially during the guerrilla phase of the war. Camp authorities ensured that the boys were properly schooled by fellow prisoners of war who were qualified teachers. To counter idleness and boredom, the young boys were taught various forms of handcraft. Participation in a variety of sports and cultural activities were also encouraged. In between household tasks, playing marbles was a favorite pastime for many of the boys. Photographs from the camps often reveal smiling faces. However, a minister of religion in one of the camps observed that beneath their outward cloaks of apparent cheerfulness, there were many hidden sorrows, homesickness, and the agony of not knowing the fate of their loved ones back in the republics. In the initial phase of the war, Boers took about 12,000 trusted black farm workers as auxiliaries along on commando. In some cases, young black boys also accompanied their fathers on commando and assisted them in setting up tents, taking care of horses, gathering firewood and cooking food. A number of black auxiliaries were likewise detained in overseas prisoner of war camps. The same fate struck a number of young black boys who were presumably captured with their fathers while serving as auxiliaries to the Boers on commando. Here, such a young boy can be seen in a group photograph with General Piet Cronje and his wife in the camp on the island of St. Helena. On the home front, about 12,000 members of the Boer forces continued stubbornly in their fight against the British Army. Nonetheless, the writing was on the wall for the two Boer republics. In May 1902, the Boer commanders surrendered and a peace accord with Britain was concluded. Returning to their destroyed farms was a traumatic experience for many Boer families. Sarah Rahl recalled,
"When we approached the farmhouse, I saw tears running down my dear father's cheeks. My mother turned her face so he couldn't see. Of course, there was no trace of our furniture and the house was completely empty. Wild animals had moved into the house. I could see the look of helplessness on the faces of my father and mother. Everything they'd sweated and worked for was destroyed and gone."
The war had a devastating economic, social and political impact on the former republics of the Transvaal and the Free State. But in the end, it was civilians who would bear the brunt of the hostilities.
In one of the African languages in South Africa, there is a saying that when the elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And in the Anglo-Boer War, a big elephant, Great Britain, fought against two smaller elephants, if you like, the two Boer republics. The people who suffered were the civilians in the war zone, white and black.
No official provision was made for black orphans, who were left destitute after the war. Most were accommodated in extended family structures or left in the care of mission stations. At the same time, about 12,000 white orphans with no family left were taken up in orphanages established mainly by the Dutch Reformed Church. Although they were well taken care of, this would not fend off years of lingering solitude, emotional hardship, and forever missing whom and what they once had, giving substance to the following conclusion by Hobhouse.
For womenfolk, war is a hard time. The excitement and glory of battle, so alluring to men, do not fall on their share. To women, war means only agony and long, slow days of suffering, and it falls hardest on the children.